Oh, I'm right out of breath. Climbing up those stairs with that heavy thing. Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the engine drivers on the island of Sodor. Mr. Edwards, the signalman, loves strawberries. So, I brought him this strawberry plant to brighten up his signal box. It's heavier than I thought, though. I think I'm going to need a little rest. Oh, I just remembered a story where Gordon plays a trick on Thomas, and Thomas was very tired. It was the first story about Thomas that I ever heard. Ah, here it is. Would you like to hear it? I would. Thomas and Gordon. Thomas was a cheeky little engine. He thought no other engine worked as hard as he did, so he used to play tricks on them, especially Gordon. One day, Gordon was resting on a siding. He was tired after pulling the express. He was just going to sleep when Thomas came up in a cheeky way. "Wake up, lazy bones," he whistled. "Do some hard work for a change. You can't catch me." And he ran off, laughing. That Thomas. Instead of going to sleep again, Gordon thought how he could pay Thomas back. One morning, Thomas wouldn't wake up. His fire went out, and there wasn't enough steam. It was nearly time for the express. The people were waiting, but the coaches weren't ready. At last, Thomas started. "Come on," said the coaches. "Hurry up." Thomas gave them a bump and started for the station. Thomas fussed into the station where Gordon was waiting. "Hurry up, you," said Gordon. "Hurry up yourself," said cheeky Thomas. "Yes," said Gordon, "I will." Thomas usually pushed behind the big trains to help them start. But Gordon started so quickly that they forgot to uncouple Thomas. The train went faster and faster, too fast for Thomas. He wanted to stop, but he couldn't. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," laughed Gordon in front. But Thomas was going faster than he had ever gone before. "I shall never be the same," he thought sadly. "My wheels will be quite worn out." At last, they stopped in the station. Phew. Everyone laughed to see Thomas puffing and panting behind. "Well, little Thomas," chuckled Gordon, "now you know what hard work means, don't you?" Poor Thomas couldn't answer. He had no breath. He just puffed slowly away to rest and had a long, long drink. He went home very slowly and was very careful afterwards never to be cheeky to Gordon again. Well, Thomas can still be pretty cheeky sometimes, but I know how he feels about wanting a drink. I wonder if this strawberry plant would like a drink too. There you go. It's funny how Thomas looks so small from up here. Oh, hello again. You know, sometimes big engines like Gordon can look down on small engines as if the work they do isn't very important. But small engines work very hard too. I remember one time that... But hold on. Let me find the story so I can tell it to you properly. Here we are. Edward and Gordon. Edward and Gordon were in the shed. "You watch me this afternoon, little Edward," boasted Gordon, "as I rush through with the express. That'll be a splendid sight for you." And he puffed away. Edward went off too to do some shunting. Edward liked shunting. It was fun playing with trucks. I liked shunting too. Pulling the trucks about, bumping them into the sidings, bish, bash, Oh, sorry, I better get back to reading the story. Soon, Edward heard a whistle. Gordon came puffing along, very slowly and very crossly. Instead of nice shining coaches, he was pulling a lot of very dirty coal trucks. "A goods train, a goods train, a goods train," he grumbled. "The shame of it. The shame of it. Edward laughed and went to find some more trucks. But soon a porter came and spoke to the driver. Gordon can't get up the hill. Will you take Edward and push him, please? They found Gordon halfway up the hill and very cross. His driver and fireman were talking to him severely. You're not trying, they told him. I can't do it, said Gordon. The noisy trucks hold an engine back so. We've come to push, said Edward. No good at all, said Gordon. They brought Gordon's train back to the bottom of the hill and Edward came up behind the brake van, ready to push. The guard blew his whistle and they pushed and pulled as hard as they could. I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, puffed Gordon. I will do it, I will do it, I will do it, puffed Edward. Then, almost before he realised it, Gordon found himself at the top of the hill. I've done it, I've done it, I've done it, he puffed proudly. And he forgot about Edward pushing behind. He didn't wait to say thank you, but ran on very fast. Edward was left behind and couldn't catch up. But the driver and fireman were very pleased with him and gave him a nice long drink of water. I'll get out my paint tomorrow, said the driver, and give you a beautiful new coat of blue with red stripes. Then you'll be the smartest engine in the shed. Lovely. Oh, that reminds me. I wonder if Thomas's paint is dry yet. I better go see. I better take a look. See you again soon. Goodbye. Oh, hello there. I've still got a bit of time before I have to take Thomas out with Annie and Clarabelle. You know, Thomas didn't always have his own coaches. No, when he first arrived, he just used to shunt the trucks or fetch the coaches for the bigger engines. In fact, the first time he took his own passenger train out, he made a right mess of it. Listen to this story. Thomas's train. Thomas often grumbled because he was not allowed to pull passenger trains. The other engines laughed. You're too impatient, they said. One night, Henry was ill. The workmen worked hard, but Henry didn't get any better. In the morning, Thomas had to get Henry's coaches ready. If Henry is ill, Thomas thought, perhaps I shall pull his train. Thomas took Henry's coaches to the platform and wanted to run round in front at once, but his driver wouldn't let him. Don't be impatient, Thomas, he said. Thomas waited and waited. The people got in, the guard and station master walked up and down, but still Henry didn't come. The Fat Controller came out of his office to see what was the matter. Find another engine, he ordered. There is only Thomas, said the station master. You'll have to do it then, Thomas, said the Fat Controller. So Thomas ran round to the front and backed down on the coaches, ready to start. Don't be impatient, said his driver. Wait till everything is ready. But Thomas was too excited. What happened then? No one knows. Perhaps they forgot to couple Thomas to the train. Anyway, Thomas started. People shouted and waved to him, but he didn't stop. They're waving because I'm such a splendid engine, Thomas thought. Henry says it's hard to pull trains, but I think it's easy. Hurry, 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 he puffed, pretending to be like Gordon. Then Thomas came to a signal at danger. Bother, he thought, I must stop. And he blew an angry peep peep on his whistle. Hello, Thomas, said the signalman. What are you doing here? I'm pulling a train, said Thomas proudly. Can't you see? Where are your coaches then? Said the signalman. Thomas looked back. Why, bless me, he said. We've left them behind. Poor Thomas was so sad he nearly cried. At the station, all the passengers were talking at once. They were telling the Fat Controller what a bad railway it was. But when Thomas came back and they saw how sad he was, they couldn't be cross. So they coupled him to a train, and this time he really pulled it. Silly Thomas. Imagine rushing off without the coaches. Oh, I better get going. Oh, Thomas is waiting with Annie and Clarabelle. Goodbye. Oh, dear, silly Mia. Oh, hello again. I was just looking for the story where Thomas first pulls the breakdown train. I'm pretty sure that's also where Thomas first gets his own branch line. Do you know this story? Thomas and the breakdown train. Every day, the Fat Controller came to the station to catch his train, and he always said hello to Thomas. There were lots of trucks in the yard, and Thomas worked hard to push and pull them to their right places. But on a siding by themselves were some trucks that Thomas was told he mustn't touch, and two strange things that his driver called cranes. That's the breakdown train, he said. The cranes are for lifting heavy things like engines and coaches and trucks when there's an accident. One day, Thomas was in the yard when he heard an engine whistling, "Help! Help!" And a goods train came rushing through, much too fast. It was a new engine called James, and he was frightened. His brake blocks were on fire, and sparks streamed out on each side. On, laughed the trucks, and poor James disappeared under a bridge. Oh my, that sounds dangerous. A bell rang in the signal box, and a man came running. "James is off the line! The breakdown train, quickly!" So Thomas was coupled on. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," he puffed. "Bother those trucks and their tricks. I hope poor James isn't hurt." They found poor James and the trucks at a bend in the line. The brake van and the last few trucks were on the rails, but the front ones were in a heap. James was in a field with a cow looking at him. "Never mind, James," said his driver. "It wasn't your fault. It was those wooden brakes they gave you. We always said they were no good." Wooden brakes. Dear, oh dear. Thomas pushed the breakdown train alongside. Then he pulled the unhurt trucks out of the way. "Oh dear, they groaned. "Serves you right," puffed Thomas crossly. Then, with the two cranes, they put James back on the rails. James tried to move, but he couldn't. So Thomas helped him back to the shed. The Fat Controller was very pleased with Thomas. "You are a really useful engine," he said kindly. "James shall have some proper brakes and a new coat of paint. And you, Thomas, shall have a branch line all to yourself." What did I tell you? That's when Thomas first got his branch line. Now Thomas is as happy as can be. He has a branch line all to himself and puffs proudly backwards and forwards with two coaches all day. And we know who those coaches are, don't we? Annie and Clarabelle. Oh. And they're waiting outside. It's time I took Thomas along his branch line again now. Goodbye. My favourite lunch. Oh, I can't wait. Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the drivers on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. I'm on my break, so I've come to Mr. Edward's signal box to eat my lunch. Oh, I've got fish and chips. And they're still hot. Oh, a bit too hot, actually. Think I better leave them to cool down. That reminds me of a story. Do you remember when Thomas had fish and chips? Or rather, he didn't. His driver did. Here we are. Thomas goes fishing. Thomas's branch line had a station by a river. As he rumbled over the bridge, he would see people fishing. Thomas thought it would be lovely to stop by the river. Every time he met another engine, he would say, "I want to fish." They all answered, Engines don't go fishing. One day, Thomas stopped to take on water at a station by a river. His driver turned the tap, but it was out of order and no water came. "Never mind," said his driver. "We'll get some water from the river." They found a bucket and some rope and went to the bridge. The bucket was old and had 5 holes, so they had to fill it, pull it up and empty it into Thomas's tank as quickly as they could. That's good," puffed Thomas as he started along the valley. But then he began to feel a pain in his boiler and steam hissed from his safety valve. His fireman opened the tap in his feed pipe to let more water into his boiler, but none came. "Oh dear," groaned Thomas. I'm going to burst. They damped down his fire and struggled on. Just outside the last station, they ran Thomas onto a siding right out of the way, and his driver wrote notices in large letters. "Danger, keep away." Soon, the inspector and Sir Topham Hatt arrived. The inspector climbed up to look into the tanks. "Excuse me, sir," he said to Sir Topham Hatt. "Please look in the tank and tell me what you see." "Goodness gracious me," said Sir Topham Hatt. "How did the fish get in there?" Thomas's driver told them about the bucket. Sir Topham Hatt laughed. "Well, Thomas, so you and your driver have been fishing. But fish don't suit you, and we must get them out." So the driver and the fireman fetched rods and nets and took turns at fishing in Thomas's tank. Then they all had a lovely picnic supper of fish and chips beside the line. "That was good," said Sir Topham Hatt, "but you mustn't do it again." "I won't," said Thomas sadly. "Engines don't go fishing. It's too uncomfortable." Poor Thomas. But at least they had a lovely picnic supper of fish and chips. Like me. Lovely.
Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the drivers on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. It's very, very cold today, so I've come up to the signal box to get warm. Thomas is still away on his travels. Oh, I wonder if it's as cold as this where he's working. Somewhere with lots of snow, like up here at the North Pole. I hope he remembered to bring his snow plough. An engine can get into a lot of trouble if there's snow on the tracks. And that reminds me of a story. It's called Thomas, Terence and the Snow. One day, Thomas was puffing along when he heard the chug-chug of a tractor at work. "Hello," said the tractor. "I'm Terence. I'm ploughing." "I'm Thomas," said Thomas. "What ugly wheels you've got." "They're not ugly. They're caterpillars," said Terence. "I can go anywhere. I don't need rails." Winter came, and with it, dark, heavy clouds full of snow. "Pah! Snow is silly soft stuff," said Thomas. "It won't stop me." But soon the rails were 2 dark lines standing out in the white snow. "We're going to fix your snowplough on, and I want no nonsense, please," said Thomas's driver. But they couldn't make it fit properly. Next morning, Thomas's driver was anxious. "The snow's not bad here," he said to the fireman, "but it's sure to be deep in the valley." Thomas entered a tunnel. At the other end, he saw a heap of snow fallen from the sides of the cutting. "Silly old snow," said Thomas, and he charged it. Whoosh! Thomas was stuck in the drift. More snow fell and piled up around him until Thomas was nearly buried. "I shall have to stop here till I'm frozen," said Thomas. "What a silly engine I am." Bertie the bus came to pick up the passengers. And then, who should chug through the tunnel to rescue Thomas? It was Terence, the tractor. "Thank you, Terence. Your caterpillars are splendid," said Thomas gratefully. Thomas still doesn't like wearing his snowplough, but he knows he has to if it's snowing. Well, I better make sure I'm dressed up warm before I go back out again. Goodbye. See you again soon. Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the drivers on Sodor. Usually I drive Thomas, but he's off working in other countries at the moment. I do hope he's being careful and not racing around. Thomas does love to race, especially with his good friend Bertie, the bus. I remember when Thomas and Bertie first met. There's a story about it in one of these books. Ah, here we are. Thomas and Bertie. One day, Thomas was waiting at the junction with Annie and Clarabel when a bus came into the yard. "I'm Bertie," said the bus. "I've come to help you with your passengers." "Help me?" said Thomas. "Yes, I can go faster than you," said Bertie. "You can't," said Thomas. "I'll race you," said Bertie. Their drivers agreed. Bertie raced off ahead at first, but he had to stop at the level crossing. Poor Bertie was left fuming at the gates, while Thomas sailed happily past. "Goodbye, Bertie," called Thomas. He's very cheeky, isn't he? Come along, sang Thomas. We're coming along, sang Annie and Clarabel. Then Thomas whistled in horror. Up ahead, Bertie was crossing the bridge over the railway, tooting triumphantly on his horn. Thomas stopped to let passengers off at the next station. "Goodbye, Thomas. You must be tired," said Bertie. "Oh dear," thought Thomas, "we've lost." But as they rumbled over the bridge, there was Bertie, waiting at the red light. Now Thomas reached his full speed, and slowly but surely he drew ahead, leaving Bertie far behind. Thomas, Annie and Clarabel whooshed into the last station. The passengers gave them 3 cheers. Hip, hip, hooray! Thomas and Bertie often talk about their race, but Bertie's passengers don't like being bounced about like peas in a frying pan, and Sir Topham Hatt has warned Thomas about racing. So, although they would like to have a race, I don't think they ever will. Or will they? Well, I better go and collect my passengers. Hip, hip, hooray! See you again soon. Goodbye. Oh, hello there. My name's Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the engine drivers here on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. I was just thinking about Thomas. He's away, travelling the world at the moment. I wonder what kind of exotic animals he'll see. Maybe he'll see an elephant. I remember a story about an engine who saw an elephant right here on Sodor, and he wasn't too happy about it. It's in one of these books. Yes, here it is. It's called Henry and the Elephant. One morning, Henry was told to take some workmen to a tunnel which was blocked. The workmen tried to look through it, but it was quite dark. No daylight shined through the other end. The workmen took their tools and went inside. Suddenly, with a shout, all the workmen ran out of the tunnel looking frightened. "We went to the block and started to dig, but it grunted and moved," they said. "Right," said the foreman. "I'll ride in the car and Henry shall push it." Henry hated tunnels. "Peep, peep, peep, peep," he whistled. "I don't want to go in." "We must clear the line," said his driver. Henry slowly advanced into the darkness. Bump! "Help! Help! We're going back!" wailed Henry. Henry came out of the tunnel first, and then the cars, and last of all, pushing hard, came a large, rather cross elephant. The elephant stopped pushing and came towards them. The workman gave him some sandwiches and cake. So he forgot he was cross and remembered he was hungry. The elephant drank 3 buckets of water without stopping, and he was going to drink another when Henry let off steam. The elephant jumped and whoosh, squirted the water all over Henry by mistake. When the keeper came, the workmen rode home happily in the cars, laughing at their adventure. But Henry was very cross. An elephant pushed me, and an elephant hushed me, he hissed. Oh dear, poor Henry. Do you know, I quite feel like some sandwiches and cake after that story. I wonder what Mrs. Perkins has put in my lunch. Goodbye, see you again soon. Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the engine drivers here on Sodor. I was just thinking about my good friend Thomas. He's away working across the other side of the world. But engines don't always go away to work. Oh, sometimes they come here to Sodor. There was once a bright green little engine that came here to work on the railway. You can probably guess who it was. There's a story about it in one of these books. Ah, yes, here it is. Trouble in the Shed. Sir Topham Hatt was sitting at his desk when the station master came in. "There's trouble in the shed, sir," he said. "Henry is sulking. There's no train, and the passengers are saying that this is a bad railway." "Indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I will go and speak to Henry." He found Henry, Gordon and James looking sulky. "Come along, Henry," he said. "It's time your train was ready." "You fetch our coaches and we will pull them," said Henry. "Tender engines don't shunt." "Oh, indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt. "We'll see about that. Engines on my railway do as they're told." Sir Topham Hatt went to an engine workshop where there was a smart little green engine with 4 wheels. "If I choose you, will you work hard?" "Oh, sir, yes, sir," said the engine. "That's a good engine," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I will call you Percy." Thomas returned to Sodor and Sir Topham Hatt explained what had been going on. "Henry, Gordon and James are sulking. They say they won't shunt like common tank engines, so I have shut them in the sheds and want you 3 to run the line." "Common tank engines indeed," snorted Thomas. "We'll show them." Edward and Thomas worked the line, while Percy puffed along the branch line. Henry, Gordon and James stayed shut in the shed for some time.
They were cold, lonely and miserable, and they wished they hadn't been so silly.
Well, Henry, Gordon and James still complain if they have to shunt, but they only need reminding about being shut in the shed, and they change their mind and get back to work. Ooh, talking about work, I think it's time for me to be back on the tracks. Goodbye. Oh, it's cold out there. Mr. Edwards? Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins, the engine driver. I thought Mr. Edwards would be here. He's the signalman. This is his signal box. He's probably gone to get some more coal. Oh, you don't want to run out of coal on a day like this. Oh, that reminds me of a story about Henry. Henry was a different shape when he came to the island, and he needed special coal. But that's all changed after a bit of a mishap. Now, let's see. Here we are. The Flying Kipper. One winter evening, Henry's driver told him they had to be up early in the morning to pull the Flying Kipper. That's the train that collects the fish from the harbour. "Don't tell Gordon," said Henry's driver, "but if we pull the Kipper nicely, Sir Topham Hatt might let us pull the express." "Hurrah!" cried Henry. At the docks, Henry was ready at 5 o'clock. There was snow and frost. Fishermen were loading their fish onto the Flying Kipper. The guard showed his green lamp, and the Flying Kipper was ready to go. Henry whooshed under bridges and clattered through stations. Then he saw a yellow signal up ahead. Caution, thought Henry. But the home signal was down, and that meant all clear. Henry couldn't know that the switches were frozen up ahead. Oh no, Henry had better be careful. A freight train was waiting on the siding to let the Flying Kipper pass. The driver and fireman were drinking cocoa in the brake car. "The Kipper is due," said the guard.
Who cares, said the fireman. This is good cocoa. The men got out just in time as Henry rushed onto the siding. He tried to stop, but his wheels slipped on the icy rails. There was a sudden crash, and Henry sprawled on his side. Dearie me, luckily nobody was hurt. The signal was down, sir, explained Henry when Sir Topham Hatt came to see him. Cheer up, Henry, said Sir Topham Hatt. It wasn't your fault. Ice and snow caused the accident. Henry was sent to Crewe to be repaired, where they gave him a new shape and a larger firebox, which meant Henry could use ordinary coal. When he came back, Henry felt like a different engine. The people at the station gave him 3 cheers, and he pulled the express so well that Gordon was jealous. Ah, but that's a different story. So, that's how Henry came to use ordinary coal. I hope Mr. Edwards is out getting us some ordinary coal too. In the meantime, I shall just look after his fire until he gets back. Oh, it's nippy out there. Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins. I've just popped into Mr. Edwards' signal box here to warm up before my next train. Oh, Mr. Edwards always keeps a nice fire going, especially when it's snowing. I think I'll keep my scarf on, though, for now. I think I remember a story about an engine wearing a scarf. I think it's in one of these books. Ah, yes. Here it is. Shall I read it? A scarf for Percy. It was snowing on Sodor. Thomas and Percy were awake early and feeling cold and cross. Thomas wanted a warm boiler, but Percy thought he'd be warmer still if he had a scarf. There, you see. Thomas thought it was a silly idea. Percy with a scarf round his funnel. Sir Topham Hatt had pressed his best pants to wear when he had his picture taken. I shall pack these in my trunk for later, he said. Out on the tracks, Percy couldn't stop thinking about scarves. He saw them everywhere. My funnel's cold, he puffed. I want a scarf. Engines don't wear scarves, said Henry. Engines with proper funnels do, snorted Percy. You've only got a small one. Percy's driver liked to switch off Percy's steam outside the station so he could sneak up quietly and surprise the coaches. But the porters were taking some luggage across the tracks, including Sir Topham Hatt's trunk. They didn't hear Percy coming, and Percy bumped right into the trolley. Boxes and bags flew everywhere, and sticky jam splattered over everyone. Jam? Where did jam come from? Oh, maybe Lady Hatt packed a picnic in case they got hungry. And Sir Topham Hatt's best pants ended up wrapped round Percy's funnel, just like a scarf. Everyone was very sticky and very cross. Back at the sheds, Percy's driver cleaned him up. It's going to be warmer tomorrow, Percy, said Henry. You won't need a scarf. Certainly not, said Percy. Engines don't need scarves. Engines need warm boilers. Everyone knows that. Well, I think I'm warm enough now. Don't think I need my scarf anymore. Not until I go back outside in the snow.
Oh, hello there. My name's Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the engine drivers on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. Sometimes I drive Thomas, but Thomas is working in a country far away. Oh, I bet Thomas is having lots of fun. But I hope he's behaving himself and not getting into too much trouble. Oh, that reminds me of a story about Thomas getting into trouble. And also how Toby and Henrietta first came to Sodor. The story's called Thomas in Trouble. One morning, a policeman was sitting on the grass close to the line. He was shaking a stone from his boot. Peep, peep, Thomas whistled. The policeman grunted and put his boot on. "Where's your cow catcher?" he asked accusingly. "But I don't catch cows, sir," said Thomas. "No side plates either," said the policeman. "Engines on public roads must have their wheels covered and a cow catcher. You haven't, so you are a danger to the public." Sir Topham Hatt was having breakfast. The butler knocked and came in. "Excuse me, sir. Thomas is in trouble with the police. You must go at once." The policeman was on the platform. Other policemen came. "The law is the law," they said, "and we can't change it. We will have to make these cow-catcher things for Thomas," said Sir Topham Hatt later. "But everyone will laugh, sir," said Thomas. "They'll say I look like a tram." "Why didn't I think of it before?" said Sir Topham Hatt. "We need a tram engine. I met a nice little engine called Toby when I was on holiday. I'll write to his controller at once." A few days later, Toby arrived. "I see you brought Henrietta," said Sir Topham Hatt. "You don't mind, do you, sir? The station master wanted to use her as a hen house." "No, indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt. "We couldn't allow that." And that's the story of how Toby and Henrietta came to Sodor. It's not really a story about Thomas getting into trouble, though, is it? Well, I should get back to work. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble with Sir Topham Hatt. Goodbye. See you again soon.
Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the engine drivers here on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. Sometimes I drive Thomas, but Thomas is working abroad at the moment. I bet he's seeing some marvellous views. Yeah, quite a nice view from this signal box. It's raised up high so the signalman can see a long way down the tracks. I can see James waiting for me down there. Oh, I feel like I'm flying high in the sky, like Harold the helicopter. That reminds me of a story about Harold flying high in the sky while Percy steams along the tracks below. Yes, here it is. It's called Percy and Harold. Percy worked hard at the harbour. An airfield was close by, and Percy heard the aeroplanes zooming overhead. The noisiest of all was a helicopter which hovered, buzzing like an angry bee. One day, Percy stopped near the airfield. The helicopter was standing quite close. "Hello," said Percy. "What whirly great arms you've got." "They're nice arms. I can hover like a bird. Don't you wish you could hover?" "I think railways are slow," said Harold, and he whirled his arms and buzzed away. "That Harold thinks I'm slow," said Percy. "Just wait, I'll show him." Percy collected his cars and started off. Soon, above the clatter of the tracks, they heard a familiar buzzing. "There's Harold," called Percy's guard. "He's not far ahead. Let's race him." "Go for it, Percy," yelled the guard. The fireman shovelled coal for dear life. "Well done, Percy," shouted the driver. "We're going ahead." Far ahead, a distant signal warned them that the wharf was near. The driver shut off steam and used Percy's brakes, so they rolled under the main line and halted smoothly on the wharf. "We've won! We've won!" shouted the fireman. "Harold's still hovering. He's looking for a place to land." So Percy's not so slow after all. And just like Percy, I think nothing beats travelling by railway. Oh, I think it's time for James and me to be out on the tracks again. See you again soon. Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the engine drivers here on the island of Sodor. Sometimes I even drive Thomas, but he's working far away. I was just imagining what it would be like to work somewhere foreign. On the mainland, there's a very big city called London. I've been there on my holiday. Gordon's been there too. He didn't like it much, though. There's a story about that in one of these books. Ah, yes, here it is. It's called Gordon Goes Foreign. Sometimes engines from the mainland visit Sodor. Gordon was talking to one of them. When I was young, he said, I remember going to London. Do you know the place? The station's called King's Cross. King's Cross? Snorted the engine from the mainland. London's Euston. Everybody knows that. Rubbish, said Duck. London's Paddington. I know, I work there. Gordon and Duck were still arguing about which station was London. I'm sure it's King's Cross, said Gordon. I'll go and prove it. One day, when he pulled the express to the big station, a porter ran over and spoke to Gordon's driver. The engine for the express has turned over. They want you to take the train to London. Fine, said the driver. We'll show them what Sir Topham Hatt's engines can do. Come on, said Gordon. Let's go. We're going to town, sang the coaches. Gordon found that London was a long, long way away. The next day, the station master came running in with the newspaper. Excuse me, sir, have you seen the news? Why? Asked Sir Topham Hatt. Famous engine at London Station, police call to control crowds. Sir Topham Hatt smiled. When Gordon returned, Sir Topham Hatt asked him if he had enjoyed himself. No, sir, I didn't, said Gordon. London's all wrong. They've changed it. It isn't King's Cross anymore, it's St Pancras. Gordon didn't realise that in the big cities, they often have lots of stations, not just one. But to me, the best stations in the world are the ones right here on Sodor, on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. Goodbye. See you again soon.
Oh, hello there. I just popped up to Mr. Edwards' signal box to wash my hands. I've been working with diesel today. Very oily. Ugh. I don't mind working with diesel engines, but that diesel, oh, he has been nothing but trouble since the first day he came here. Do you remember that story about the day Diesel first arrived? Let me remind you. Ah, here it is. Pop goes the Diesel. Duck was very proud of being Great Western. He talked endlessly about it. There are two ways of doing things, the Great Western way or the wrong way. I'm Great Western. And don't we know it, groaned the other engines. They were glad when a visitor came. Here is Diesel, said Sir Topham Hatt. I have agreed to give him a trial. He needs to learn. Please teach him, Duck. Diesel purred after Duck. Your worthy Topham Hatt thinks I need to learn. He is mistaken. We Diesels don't need to learn. We know everything. We come to a yard and improve it. We are revolutionary. Oh, said Duck. If you are thingamy, perhaps you would collect my freight cars while I fetch Gordon's coaches. Diesel, delighted to show off, purred away. When Duck returned, Diesel was trying to take some freight cars from a siding. They were old and empty. They hadn't been touched for a long time. Diesel found them hard to move. Ooh, the freight cars groaned. We can't, we won't. Diesel lost patience. Grrr, he roared and gave a great heave. We can't, we won't, cried the freight cars. Some of their brakes snapped and the gear jammed in the sleepers. Diesel shot forward on his own. Chuckled Duck. Duck ran round to where all the other freight cars stood in line. Thank you for arranging these, Diesel, he said. I must go now. Don't you want this lot? No, thank you. Diesel gulped. Why didn't you tell me? You never asked me. Besides, said Duck, you were having such fun being retro whatever it was you said. Goodbye. Diesel had to help the workmen clear the mess. He hated it. All the freight cars were laughing and singing at him. Cars are waiting in the yard, tackling them with easel. Show the world what I can do, gaily boasts the Diesel. In and out he creeps about like a great big weasel. When he pulls the wrong cars out, pop goes the Diesel. Grrr, growled Diesel, and he scuttled away to sulk in the shed. Poor old Diesel. But that's what you get when you try and show off. You can end up looking very silly. Oh, hello again. I finished my lunch, but I've still got a bit of time before I take Thomas out again. We're pulling trucks this afternoon. Everyone knows trucks can be troublesome, but engines can be troublesome too. Just listen to this story about the little narrow-gauge engine, Sir Handel, and how he plays a trick on his controller and Peter Sam. Sir Handel grumbled continually. My controller makes me shunt, he complained, and take trucks to quarries too. I'm highly sprung, and I suffer dreadfully. Our controllers don't understand our feelings, sympathised Gordon. Now, if you were ill, he winked, you couldn't go, could you? Good idea, said Sir Handel. I'll try it. That Gordon, he's telling Sir Handel to play a trick on his controller. I don't feel well, Sir Handel groaned the next morning. So the trucks were coupled behind Peter Sam. Sniggered Sir Handel. Peter Sam didn't mind the extra work. The trucks chattered behind him, but he paid no attention. Slate comes from quarries high up in the hills. It travels down in trucks on a steep railway called an incline. Peter Sam never bumped trucks unless they misbehaved. Sir Handel bumped them even if they were good, so they didn't like him. The trucks coming down the incline couldn't see Peter Sam. They thought it was Sir Handel and wanted to get their own back. Faster, faster, they grumbled, and broke the rope with a crack. Hurrah, hurrah, they roared. Peter Sam saw them hurtling down the hill towards him. He shut his eyes. The crash jerked him backwards, and a flying slate smashed a water channel. Peter Sam was soaked from funnel to cab. Bust my buffers, exclaimed Rusty when he saw him. What a mess! Rusty soon pulled Peter Sam away from the water. Peter Sam felt battered. He thanked Rusty and limped slowly home. I'm sorry about your accident, Peter Sam, said Sir Handel. I always stand well back. Trucks don't like me, you see. Why didn't you warn me? I didn't think. You never do, said the stern voice of the thin controller. You can start now while you're doing Peter Sam's work, as well as your own. Silly Sir Handel. He never should have listened to Gordon. I guess pretending he was ill wasn't such a good idea after all. Well, that's my lunch break over. Better get back to Thomas. Oh, I hope he's not planning to play any tricks on me. He can be cheeky sometimes. Bye. Oh, hello there. My name's Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the drivers here on the railway. Sometimes I drive Thomas, but he's away travelling at the moment with his regular driver. Thomas loves travelling, so does his driver. But there was a time when Thomas left his driver behind and went travelling on his own. There's a story about it in one of these books. Ah, here it is. Thomas comes to breakfast. Thomas has worked his branch line for many years. You know just where to stop, Thomas, laughed his driver. You could almost manage without me. Thomas didn't understand that his driver was joking. My driver says I don't need him anymore, he told the others. Don't be so daft, snorted Percy. I'd never go anywhere without my driver, said Toby. Nonsense, boasted Thomas. I'm not scared. Thomas woke the next morning. His boiler was lit, but his driver hadn't come yet. I'll just go out and then I'll stop, and whoosh! That'll make Percy and Toby jump. So very quietly, Thomas headed for the door. Thomas thought he was being very clever, but really he was only moving because a careless cleaner had knocked his controls. Thomas soon realised his mistake. He tried to stop, but he couldn't. The siding ended at the road. Thomas's wheels left the rails and crunched the tarmac. Horrors! He exclaimed and shut his eyes. The station master's family were having breakfast. The house rocked, broken glass tinkled, and plaster peppered their plates. And there was Thomas, peering anxiously into the room. Workmen propped up the house and laid rails throughout the garden. Donald and Douglas, puffing hard, managed to haul Thomas back to the yard. Thomas's funnel was bent. He was in disgrace. You are a very naughty engine, said Sir Topham Hatt. You must go to the steamworks to be mended. Meanwhile, a diesel rail car will do your work. A diesel, sir? Thomas spluttered. Yes, Thomas, said Sir Topham Hatt. Diesels never gallivant off to breakfast in station masters' houses. Oh, I don't think Thomas will be going off travelling without his driver any time soon, do you? Oh, but I hope you'll come back for a story soon. Goodbye. Oh, hello there. My name's Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the drivers here on the island of Sodor. Sometimes I drive Thomas, but Thomas is travelling abroad at the moment. Isn't he adventurous, travelling to lots of different countries and different climates? He's a brave little tank engine, not scared of anything. Or is he? I remember a time when Thomas got quite a fright. It's a story in one of these books. Here it is. The Ghost Train. Percy was telling Thomas about when his driver saw the ghost train. Oh, it makes my wheels wobble to think of it, said Percy. Pa, said Thomas. You're just a silly little engine, Percy. I'm not scared. That night, Sam was delivering a load of lime to Mr. Crow. As he crossed the track, his cartwheel got stuck in the mud. He didn't know that Percy was on his way. Crash! Percy broke the cart to smithereens. Lime flew everywhere, and Percy was covered in it. What have you done to Percy? Said the signalman. People will think he's a ghost. On their way home, Percy and his driver met Toby. Oh, do let's pretend I'm a ghost and scare Thomas, said Percy. That'll teach him to say I'm a silly little engine. Toby hurried back to the sheds. I have just seen something. It looked like Percy's ghost. Don't be frightened, Toby, said Thomas. Percy approached the shed quietly and glided through it. Let me in, said Percy in a spooky voice. Oh dear, exclaimed Thomas, and he hurried out the other way. But Thomas didn't return that night. The next morning, Toby asked him where he'd been. I slept in the goods shed, said Thomas, and I can't stop. I've got to see a coach about a train. And he shot off like a jackrabbit. Percy rolled up alongside Toby. Well, anyone would think, chuckled Toby, that our Thomas had just seen a ghost. So, seems Thomas is not quite as brave as he makes out. Oh, well, we can all be scared sometimes. It's time for me to go. See you again soon. Goodbye. Oh, hello there. I'm Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the drivers on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. It's a lovely spring day out there. Up to now, the weather's been quite cold, but now it's warmed up and all the snow is melted. I love this warm weather, but it can cause problems too. The melting snow can cause the rivers to rise and even to flood. That's what happens in one of these stories too. It's called Toby's Tightrope, but it's also about Mavis too. Mavis is a diesel engine belonging to the Farquhar Quarry Company. Mavis had taken cars down Toby's line and got stuck because she didn't know how to manage on the icy rails. The manager spoke to her severely. "You are a very naughty engine. You have no business going down Toby's line instead of doing your own work up here." To put the cars where Toby wanted them, Mavis had to go backwards and forwards, taking a few at a time. "If we used the tiniest bit of Toby's line," Mavis said, "we could save all this bother." The manager allowed her to go as far as the first level crossing. Some trains were so long that Mavis had to go beyond the level crossing. This gave her ideas. "Will you bump me at the level crossing and tell no one I asked you?" she asked the cars. The cars were delighted and promised they would. But then Toby arrived while Mavis was elsewhere and decided to shunt the cars himself. They reached the level crossing and Toby's brakes came on. "On, on," yelled the cars, giving him a fearful bump. Toby was away, with the cars screaming and yelling behind him. What none of them had realised was that melted snow from the mountains had turned a quiet stream into a raging torrent. The supports of the bridge had been washed away, leaving the rails like tightropes across the gap. The driver braked hard. Toby went into a squealing slide, groaned fearfully, and stopped, with his wheels treading the tightrope over the abyss. Mavis was horrified. She brought some men who anchored Toby with ropes while she pulled the cars away. Then she ran to the rescue. Toby was soon back on firm track and saying thank you to Mavis. "A very smart piece of work," said Sir Topham Hatt. "Mavis did well." Mavis looked ashamed. "It was my fault about those cars, sir," she faltered. "I didn't know." Mavis is still young and makes mistakes, but she's never too proud to ask Toby. Toby always helps her put things right. And the manager agreed that Mavis could come down the line sometimes too. Well, I suppose everyone makes mistakes sometimes, don't they? But not everyone is as kind as Toby to help their friends put their mistakes right again.
Oh, hello there. My name's Mr. Perkins. I'm one of the engine drivers here on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. Thomas is working abroad at the moment. He must be seeing some amazing sights and meeting all sorts of new engines from all over the world. Isn't he lucky? The only way I get to meet so many engines is to go to a railway exhibition. I remember when the Sodor engines took part in an exhibition on the mainland. There's a story about it in one of these books. Ah, yes, here it is. It's called Sir Topham Hatt's Engines. One evening, Thomas brought his last train to the junction. "I'm going to the big station," he told Percy and Toby. "Sir Topham Hatt has a plan he wants to tell us." At the big station, Sir Topham Hatt was waiting for them. "The people of the mainland have read about us in books," he said, "but they don't believe we are real. So I am taking my engines to the mainland to show them." "Hooray! Hooray!" the engines whistled. "We leave the day after tomorrow," said Sir Topham Hatt. "Meanwhile, as these engines have kindly come from the other railway to do your work, please show them what to do." It was Thomas's job to show the new engines how to shunt coaches. But Thomas was showing off, and he crashed into some buffers. His front was badly bent. Thomas's driver telephoned Sir Topham Hatt. "I'll send some men," he said. "But if they can't mend Thomas in time, we'll go to the mainland without him." The next day, Sir Topham Hatt paced the platform. He looked at his watch. "1 minute more," he said to the guard. "Peep, peep, peep," whistled Thomas as he panted into the station. He was just in time. Thomas hurried into line and all the engines puffed off on their way to the mainland. When they arrived, the engines stood side by side in a big airy shed. Hundreds of people came to see them, they said. Nothing anywhere can compare with Sir Topham Hatt's engines. I quite agree, and I can't wait for Thomas to come back to Sodor. I hope you'll come back again soon too. Goodbye.